On April 27th, 2016, in Hochsta, Germany, police stormed the home of Wilfred W. and Angelika B., arresting the couple for the murder of a woman they had held captive for months in horrific conditions. However, this initial charge barely scratched the surface of their depravity. Numerous women had been lured to the house through ads in a Lonely Hearts column. These women, often the most vulnerable, found themselves trapped in a nightmarish cycle of abuse, torture, and murder that could span for years. Victims were subjected to daily torment with stun guns and Bunsen burners and many other items used in their sadistic, sickening games of torture. The case became a media sensation as the grisly details emerged, and the house came to be infamously known as the House of Horrors in Hochsta. This video is longer than usual because I wanted to show you the development of the crimes and how they kept pushing to become more depraved. In Germany, they hide some individuals' identities, so I can only show you images that are publicly available, and that's why some people in this case are not identified, but we do know what happened to them. They have been dubbed the German Fred and Rose West, which tells you how horrific these crimes were. But before we dive in, I want to tell you about my other channel called Grim Tales, where I am covering true stories that are shocking but not murderous. I think if you find this content interesting, then you should go and see what's over there. Link to the channel is in the comments. Also, if you find this video interesting, then please drop the video a like and leave a comment, as it really helps me out. Thank you. This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. The background of Wilfred and Angelika remain largely unknown, but here is what we do know. Wilfred was born in 1970 in Bochum, Germany. He grew up with his sister in a household dominated by their abusive, alcoholic father. The constant fear and trauma of beatings defined their childhood. Seeking escape, Wilfred's mother eventually found a new partner, a farmer, and moved the family to his rural property in the early 1990s. After enduring years of beatings, initially, the farm provided a refuge and a sense of stability. Wilfred immersed himself in farm work, which offered a welcome distraction from his turbulent past. However, the seeming tranquility was short-lived. Every Sunday, when Wilfred's mother left to work, her new partner would take advantage of her absence and intimately abuse Wilfred and his sister. They bore this additional torment in silence, feeling unable to seek help. To support himself, Wilfred took on various menial jobs. Though he struggled to find a stable career, he attempted to train as a dog handler and a mechanic, but each effort ended in failure, leaving him to repeatedly return to the farm. In 1991, Wilfred's first known relationship began with a woman named Michaela. Their relationship was casual and open, and although after a time they were not an item, they were still seeing each other. 3 years later, in 1994, Wilfred met Anya S., who had placed an ad seeking love in a local paper. They quickly connected and moved in together in the city of Paderborn. The initial happiness faded when she moves in, and Wilfred's behaviour turned violent. He began slapping Anya, which escalated to punching. Despite this, they married, with Anya perhaps clinging to the hope that marriage would bring stability and change. Instead, Wilfred's treatment of Anya grew increasingly brutal after their marriage. He beat her with boxing gloves, burned her with an iron and a hairdryer, and used a lighter to inflict further burns to her skin. Anya was left with open sores all over her body. Adding to the horror, Wilfred invited his ex-girlfriend, Michaela, to stay with them, and she joined in on the abuse. Wilfrid instructed Michaela to attack Anya with a club, hitting her in the vagina and burning her. Wilfrid forced Anya to drink alcohol, poured it onto her wounds, and tortured her with a heated rubber pipe. Both Wilfrid and Michaela subjected Anya to relentless mental abuse, mocking and humiliating her while cheering each other on. The horrific abuse continued for weeks. Anya was explicitly warned that any attempt to escape would result in her death. Fortunately, on September 21st, 1994, Anya's family, concerned by the lack of contact, managed to rescue her from the house. Wilfrid was arrested and charged. During this time, Michaela gave birth to Wilfrid's child, but he had no involvement with either Michaela or the child afterwards. Wilfrid received a prison sentence of 2 years and 9 months for his abuse of Anya, while Michaela received a 1-year suspended sentence for her part in the torture. Upon his release, Wilfrid secured a job as a caretaker at a railway station. It was during this period, in 1999, that he stumbled upon another ad in the Lonely Hearts column, this time from a woman named Angelica. She was born on January 21st, 1970, and grew up on a modest farm with her parents. From a young age, she was involved in farm work, which defined much of her childhood and adolescence. Her life was simple and isolated, with no close friends and no particular hobbies to speak of. But importantly, she was happy. Every penny she earned from her labour on the farm was carefully saved, and by the time she reached adulthood, she had amassed around 160,000 Deutschmark, a significant sum. Despite having an IQ of around 120, Angelica had not pursued any notable academic or professional achievements. Her romantic life was equally uneventful. She had a brief fling with a man, but that relationship ended quickly when it became clear that he was interested only in her money. This left Angelica disheartened and wary of future relationships. In 1999, tragedy struck when her father passed away. Angelica was deeply affected by the loss, as she had always been close to her father. She was very much a daddy's girl. Grief-stricken, she threw herself into her work on the farm, finding solace in the familiar routines and responsibilities. The farm, however, was now short-handed. Angelica and her mother struggled to keep up with the demands of running it. Recognizing the need for additional help, Angelica's mother decided it was time to bring another man into their lives. She posted an ad in the Lonely Hearts column on Angelica's behalf, seeking a partner who could also assist with work on the farm. It was in response to this ad that Wilfrid came into Angelica's life. His arrival marked the beginning of a new, albeit troubling chapter for Angelica. She described it as love at first sight. They would walk the streets hand in hand, exchanging kisses and displaying their affection openly. She was completely smitten. Just 3 months later, on March 17th, 1999, they got married. A few months after that, they welcomed a baby into their lives. On the surface, they appeared to be a happy family. However, the same cycle of abuse that plagued Wilfrid's previous marriage began to appear. 4 years later, in 2003, the couple moved to Schlangen in the district of Lippe. Sadly, their baby was taken away from them for reasons that remain unknown. In an effort to isolate Angelica, Wilfrid forbid her from contacting her mother. Wilfrid's control of Angelica was absolute. He demanded that his meals be prepared at a specific time each day, and if she failed to meet these demands, he subjected her to hours of interrogation. If these sessions didn't satisfy him, the beatings would begin. If she disturbed him as he slept at night, he would chain her up in another part of the house, treating her as less than human. Angelica had 2 pets, a dog and a cat, but Wilfrid ordered her to get rid of them, and in a horrific act of obedience, Angelica shot the dog and placed the cat in the tumble dryer. Horrific. Wilfrid's cruelty extended to what he called games for his own perverse amusement. One such game, blanket torture, involved wrapping Angelica in blankets and strangling her until she passed out multiple times. In a more extreme version, he would put a bag over her head and bite her breasts, drawing blood, and this was his preferred method of the game. In court, Angelica later testified that she believed this torment was a twisted sign of love, thinking that Wilfrid kept her alive because he could have easily killed her. The daily abuse included burning her with a Bunsen burner, pouring boiling water on her, stabbing her, and knocking out her teeth. Despite this relentless brutality, Angelica stayed with him. Eventually, Wilfrid expressed that he no longer found Angelica attractive. He didn't want to leave her, but he needed something more. Desperate to please him, Angelica agreed to help find another woman. She began placing ads in newspapers with taglines such as "Poultry farmer seeks love," a nice guy with a car looking for a future with a woman. When women responded, it was Angelica who replied. As Wilfrid was not good with writing, he would occasionally send voice messages and speak on the phone, but it was a joint effort to lure in the women. This marked the beginning of a prolonged spree of torture and murder. In 2008, 38-year-old Katie O made contact. After several phone conversations, she fell in love with Wilfrid and moved in with them. To make things easier, Angelica pretended to be Wilfrid's sister. Quickly, the couple assumed control over Katie's life. They changed her address to their own so that her mail would come to them. They forced her to beg her grandparents for money, which they took, amounting to thousands of euros. The physical abuse began soon after. Katie recalled a particularly brutal incident and quote, "I'll never forget this. He went shopping and then came back to me. I still had something on the stove and just opened the door for him and went back to the stove. I didn't take the shopping from him. That made him so angry that he hit me with both hands. He hit everything of mine that he could and didn't stop. I kept it to myself and worked it out myself. Wilfrid convinced me that it was my fault and I believed it. I wanted to have a boyfriend at the time and I accepted that." Wilfrid and Angelica even convinced Katie that she had epilepsy, forcing her to take unknown medication. Katie spent weeks locked inside her home, mentally broken and believing there was no escape. She was given a list of strict rules, such as not interrupting or talking back to Wilfrid or Angelica, always being ready and attentive, and essentially acting as their obedient slave. Any failure to follow these rules resulted in severe beatings. Everything seemed hopeless for Katie until one night, Wilfrid threatened to kill her. Instead of accepting the abuse, something inside her snapped. She ran to the bathroom and escaped through a window, fleeing to a neighbour's house and calling her brothers for help. This marked the end of her 9 months of hell. Although Katie managed to escape, she didn't report the abuse to the police. She thought no one would believe her. She just wanted to move on with her life and was grateful to have survived, which is understandable. But unfortunately, this allowed the horrific couple to continue their reign of terror on other victims. One thing Angelica learned from this experience was that when there was another female around, Wilfrid attacked them and not her. She liked this. The next woman to respond to one of Wilfrid's ads was named Anya W. For about 4 weeks, they had been talking on the phone, building a connection, but they had not yet met in person. Late one evening, Anya's doorbell rang. Not expecting any visitors, she cautiously opened the door and was shocked to find Wilfrid standing there. Without hesitation, he proposed to her, pulling out 4 different rings. He claimed they were from his ex-girlfriends, but I have a feeling that they might have belonged to other victims. Anya's instincts screamed danger. She felt a chill run down her spine, sensing that her life was at risk. Despite her fear, she forced herself to remain calm and play along. She chose one of the rings, but kept Wilfred at the door, refusing to let him into her home. She made up a reason to return to bed, suggesting that they could continue their conversation the next day. The moment the door closed, Anya's heart raced. She knew she had to act quickly. The next day, she cut off all contact with Wilfred, telling him that on no uncertain terms that she did not want to see or hear from him again. She hoped that that would be the end of it, but her ordeal was far from over. Angelica and Wilfred retaliated viciously. They began stalking Anya's home, watching her every move and calling her almost constantly. The tension escalated as she realized they were always nearby, a lurking threat that she couldn't escape. The persistent harassment was designed to break her, to make her succumb to their control. Despite the mounting fears and stress, Anya remained strong. Her refusal to give in was a gamble with her life. Every knock on the door, every phone call was a reminder of the peril that she was in. Days stretched into what felt like an eternity, but Anya's unwavering defiance paid off. The harassment eventually ceased, and she became one of the fortunate few who managed to escape Wilfred and Angelica's clutches. Anya was safe, but I feel there were many more cases similar to hers that we just don't know about. In 2011, Wilfred and Angelica relocated from Schlangen to Hochster, lured by the offer of a vacant house at a favourable rent. After 6 years of payments, the house would become theirs, situated in a small, tight-knit community of Bosborn, with a population of around 500. The community was one where everyone knew each other, and outsiders were rare. Most villagers stayed indoors by 10 p.m, providing a perfect cover for Wilfred and Angelica's sinister activities. The couple did not integrate with the local community, preferring to keep to themselves. On the rare occasions they did interact with others, they posed as brother and sister. By this time, they had divorced, but it was likely a strategic move to avoid Wilfred's child support obligations and to ensure Angelica could retain her full benefits. This deceitful arrangement suited their dark purposes, as money was always tight. Once settled, Angelica began placing lonely hearts ads in newspapers far and wide, even reaching into other countries. In court, she later admitted that they were in debt to nearly every newspaper due to unpaid fees. Surprisingly, many women responded to the ads, but these were not random choices. Wilfred and Angelica meticulously selected their victims. The women who responded had to fit a specific profile. They were often single, without close family or friends. They typically belonged to a lower social class. These women were easy targets for manipulation, and ideally they did not drive. Above all, they were lonely, making them perfect prey for Wilfred and Angelica's predatory schemes. Under the cover of night, in a village that turned a blind eye after dark, Wilfred and Angelica's reign of terror unfolded. The idyllic appearance of Bosborn, masked by the horrors within their home, where innocent women were lured into a web of cruelty and abuse. This was the beginning of the House of Horrors in Hochster. The house itself was a dilapidated nightmare, the very image of a house of horrors. The walls were covered in mould, the wallpaper hung in tatters. Outside, a chaotic mix of chickens, goats and pigs roamed the grounds. Inside, one room was just for stray cats, adding to the sense of neglect of the place. An unused bedroom lay upstairs, cold and empty. The living room was the space in which they lived, the only space they could heat with a gas bar fire. It contained a worn-out sofa, a mattress and a cooker. The entire property was in such despair that it was no surprise that they were offered it at a low rate. One of the first women to respond to Wilfred and Angelica's ads was an unnamed woman. She had been chatting with Wilfred over the phone for weeks and believed he was a kind man. This woman had 4 children who were her world. She agreed to meet Wilfred, and he and Angelica picked her up. The moment she arrived at their house, her heart sank. The place reeked of decay and filth. She had no idea Angelica would be there, and every instinct screamed that she was in grave danger. Terrified, but determined to stay composed, she forced herself to remain calm on the outside. She needed to survive for her children. That night, they forced her to sleep on the grimy sofa, with Wilfred spooning her from behind, while Angelica lay on the mattress on the floor below, treated almost like a dog. In the dead of night, she was jolted awake by Wilfred, trying to intimately assault her. Summoning every ounce of strength, she managed to fend him off without provoking his anger. Angelica witnessed this, but remained coldly indifferent. The next day, her nightmare escalated. Wilfred overpowered her and subjected her to a day of relentless, intimate abuse. Angelica did nothing to help, and even became jealous of the attention the woman was getting. As the woman endured the horrific abuse, Wilfred and Angelica mocked her for not enjoying it, calling her boring. Desperate and with her children constantly on her mind, she knew she had to find a way out. That evening, a desperate plan began to form in her mind. She observed the squalor around her and realized that they were desperate for money. She started to play along, talking about the potential of the house and what could be done with just a little money. She offered to help them financially, but explained she needed to retrieve some documents from her apartment. Amazingly, Wilfred and Angelica were gullible enough to believe her. They drove her back to her apartment, her heart pounding with fear and hope. As soon as she arrived, she bolted from the car and sprinted into her apartment. She slammed the door shut and barricaded it with a sofa, her body trembling with a mixture of terror and relief. She had narrowly escaped a brush with death. Though scarred from the experience, she had survived and could return to her children. Whether or not she reported the incident remains unclear. A similar situation happened with another woman, Crystal P., but her ordeal took an even darker turn. Crystal responded to one of Wilfred's ads, and like the others, ended up at his house. This time, however, Crystal genuinely fell for Wilfred, which caused Angelica to have intense jealousy. Crystal seemed content with the state of the house, even discussing plans to fix it up. Unlike the other women, Crystal was allowed to return to her flat because they both believed she would come back willingly. Crystal was happily intimate with Wilfred, but she couldn't understand why his sister was always there, tagging along with them, even during their romantic moments. This fragile sense of happiness was shattered at the beginning of 2012. Driven by pure jealousy and spite, Angelica accused Crystal of snooping around the house. In a fit of rage, she attacked Crystal with pepper spray and shaved her head. Treated like a spy, Crystal's world descended into a nightmare. Wilfred joined in on the attack, and they turned on her like a pack of wolves. The psychological torment of having her head shaved and attacked must have been terrifying for Crystal. Shortly after the attack, Crystal's nightmare got worse. She said this in court, and quote, "From then on, the terror was only day and night. When I didn't clean up once, Wilfred chained me barefoot in the pigsty. It was winter and really cold. From then on, he often chained me outside and beat me there, with the flat of his hand or with his fist. He beat me black and blue. Angelica sprayed pepper spray in my eyes. Fortunately, the pigs left me alone. Once, I almost had the chance to get help. I was told to go to the neighbours with Angelica and make a fuss because they were standing at the window and staring. I just said to the neighbours, then why don't you call the police? That was a hidden cry for help from me. But then Angelica asked me to go back to the house. Over there, they took me to the floor in the kitchen, and Wilfred choked my neck. He sat on top of me and hit me with both hands. Angelica then warned him to stop at some point. That was when I had already rolled my eyes and was on the verge of unconsciousness. I never had the chance to escape. The doors were always locked. The blinds were down. I want to leave, I said to Wilfred. He just said, you love me, don't you? Once, when we were mucking out, Wilfred hit me in the face with a shovel, completely out of nowhere. All I could see was him swinging. I immediately fell over and had a wound on my forehead that bled profusely. From that point on, I just wanted to go home. Crystal's life became a living hell. She was no longer allowed to go home, forced to sleep on a filthy floor instead of the couch. They stripped her of her dignity, taking her bank cards, phone and clothes. She was denied access to the toilet, forced to use a litter tray instead. A chain was fastened around her neck, and it had a lead, and she was led around like an animal. When Crystal would use the litter tray, they would both mock her for doing so. Just pure torment. The cruelty escalated further when they chained her outside in the pigsty during the night. Crystal was terrified of the pigs, especially at night. One night, her cries disturbed Wilfred's sleep. Enraged, he went outside and beat her face with a shovel, leaving permanent marks. Crystal endured 3 months of this horrific abuse. Her torment only ended when Wilfred and Angelica, one day, out of the blue, presented her with a contract to sign, falsely stating that she had been there of her own free will and had inflicted the injuries on herself. Surprisingly, after she signed it, they let her go. Perhaps they were bored of her and looking for a new victim. Traumatized and humiliated, Crystal, like many others, did not go to the authorities. Her silent suffering was another dark chapter in Wilfred and Angelica's reign of terror. Now this is where the case takes an even darker turn, descending into even worse depravity. This is a bit of a warning. The next to respond to the ad was 33-year-old Anika. Unlike many others, Anika had grown up in a loving and stable environment. She had 2 sisters who were much older and a loving mother. Anika, who had learning difficulties, lived a fulfilling life working as a housekeeper at an old people's home, where she was adored for her dedication and kindness. She had a driving license and was generally happy, though she longed for a loving relationship. When she replied to the Lonely Hearts ad, she quickly became infatuated with Wilfred. They talked on the phone multiple times a day and constantly texted. Anika gradually withdrew from her family, and after only 2 months, she decided to move in with Wilfred at the house in Hoshta, bringing her 2 dogs with her. From the moment she moved in, the manipulation began. Wilfred and Angelica limited her contact with her mother to sporadic voicemails, often asking for money under various pretexts, like vet care for her dogs or a new car. Over time, Anika's mother sent over 25,000 euros, all of which went straight to Wilfred and Angelica. Wilfred and Anika soon got engaged with a ring Wilfred bought from a supermarket, and a few weeks later, they married. Anika informed her mother of her marriage via voicemail. Her mother recounted, "Suddenly, I was only texting Anika, and then in November, I heard via voicemail that she had gotten married. It happened very quickly. Of course, I was disappointed, but I accepted her wish to marry." One of Anika's dogs went missing, later revealed to have been abandoned by Wilfred and Angelica. This dog turned out to be the lucky one. After the marriage, Anika was expected to serve Wilfred, have his food ready, and never question anything, and to take a contraceptive pill in front of him. If anything was not obeyed, you had to apologize in writing, and if you did it again, the punishment began swiftly, a disturbingly familiar pattern of abuse. For reasons unknown, Angelika had drove Anika to visit her mother. It would be their last meeting. Angelika waited in the car whilst Anika spent about half an hour talking with her mother, apologising for taking so much money. Her mother expressed happiness for her marriage, but sadness over the lack of contact. As they hugged goodbye, Anika's mother asked, "Are you in the car here?" "Yes, Angelika is in the car. We came here together," Anika replied. "Oh, that's nice. Then I'll come with you to the car and then I can meet your sister-in-law." Straight away, Anika just said to her mother, "No, you don't want to meet her." Respecting her daughter's wishes, her mother refrained from insisting and watched as Anika left. She saw Anika walk to the car parked further down the street and drive away. Her mother later said, quote, "That was the last time I saw her." This final encounter, I am sure, still haunts her mother, knowing she let her daughter leave with a woman she never met. The abuse then reached new levels of brutality. Anika was beaten, tortured with a stun gun, scalded with boiling water, burned with lighters, strangled, and forced to drink Wilfred's urine. Most nights, she was chained to a radiator, sleeping on the floor without even a blanket. Denied bathroom access during the night, she once soiled herself. Wilfred found this disgusting, so he began chaining her arms and legs and leaving her in an old bathtub in the cellar, where she shivered through freezing nights. During this time, Angelika used Anika's phone to send messages to her mother, pretending everything was fine. She even left voicemails as herself, once calling to berate Anika's mother for not getting her a wedding present. Her mother later said, and quote, "And I get a call from Angelika. I cut it off because I didn't want to talk to this woman. She was already unpleasant to me. But she called again and left 3 voicemails at different times, saying I didn't get Anika a wedding present. I felt guilty and decided to bring her some money." Anika's mother knocked on the door of the House of Horrors, but no one answered. She was not suspecting her daughter was in any harm, never mind tied up or too sick to speak. Eventually, she left the money in an envelope and posted it through the door. Anika was growing weaker, regularly having her hair ripped out or shaved off. She looked a mess. But this wasn't enough for Angelika. She was mixing glutamate into her food. She was intolerant to it, and it made her body swell, making her even more uncomfortable. Angelika would also play cruel tricks. One of them was where she left a noose next to Anika, and when she felt at her worst, she would dream of using it, but didn't even have the energy to do so. On another day, Angelika left the back door open, allowing Anika a chance to escape. Gathering what little strength she had left, on August 1st, 2014, Anika staggered naked towards the exit. Neighbours saw her leaving the house, but she was followed closely by Angelika. Just as Anika was about to fall, Angelika cruelly held her arm out for Anika to gain support. But as Anika did, Angelika withdrew her arm, causing Anika to crash to the ground and crack her head. Neighbours reported Angelika shouting, "Get up, you lazy piece," kicking her twice in the stomach. Wilfred joined in, dragging Anika back into the house. Tragically, none of the neighbours reported this to the police. Back inside, Anika was taken to the bathtub and chained. So weak, she could barely move. She endured another of Angelika's sadistic tricks. She had turned the tap on, letting the water slowly fill around Anika. She said to Wilfred, "I've turned the water on. She's drowning now." But Wilfred intervened, shutting off the water and draining it, leaving Anika in the bathtub overnight. Angelika would later confess, and quote, "I went downstairs and there she was, staring straight ahead. It was clear she was dead. Wilfred wanted to bury her under the dung heap or throw her into a cesspit. We put her body in the freezer. I pushed her head in so far that I could put a pizza on top of it. We bought a saw and latex gloves. I sawed off a piece of the body every day and burned it in the oven. When Angelica was sawing the body, Wilfred found it extremely disturbing, so he put a CD player downstairs in the basement where the dismemberment was taking place, so to take his mind off what was really happening. Angelica did all the, and quote, dirty work. She would grind the charred remains into a dust and mixed it with grit, and at night, Wilfred and Angelica would drive around and scatter the remains through the streets. As another blow to Anika, even after her death, Angelica would continue to write to Anika's mother. In fact, her mother only knew of her daughter's death when she seen the house on the news after the crimes had come to light. Tragic. To add to the horror, Angelica hanged Anika's remaining dog, bringing to an end her stay in the House of Horrors after roughly 14 months of abuse. More victims continued to move into the house, each one broken in their own way, but somehow they managed to survive. The last victim, however, was Suzanne F., whose arrival would ultimately bring an end to the horrors within those walls. Suzanne fit the profile of their victims perfectly. Adopted as a child, she endured the trauma of finding her mother's lifeless body at the age of 16, a heavy burden that scarred her deeply. Suzanne married young and had a child, but for reasons unknown, she left her first family. She later remarried and had another child, but once again, she abandoned this family as well. Alone and vulnerable, she answered Wilfred's newspaper ad, hoping for a fresh start. At first, Wilfred seemed like a good man. He didn't drink, and his close relationship with his sister suggested he was a family man. But the familiar patterns of abuse soon emerged. As soon as Suzanne moved into the house, her head was shaved and her money and bank cards were confiscated, and the torment began. Susan was forced to carry heavy bags up and down the stairs, a pointless task designed solely to degrade her. Wilfred and Angelica filmed her struggles, finding amusement in her suffering and mocking her. Suzanne quickly lost a significant amount of weight. On the rare occasions neighbours seen her, they mistaken her gaunt appearance and bald head for someone who was suffering from cancer. Behind closed doors, Wilfred beat her, bit her, and forced her to drink his urine. Angelica eagerly participated in the torment. Suzanne, like the others before her, was coerced into writing letters, taking responsibility for her injuries. In one such letter, she blamed her sandals for being too big, and that caused her to fall down the stairs. The abuse was relentless, and Suzanne's spirit withered away. She became a ghost of her former self. One evening, the brutality reached a horrifying climax. Wilfred beat Suzanne more than what was normal, while Angelica slammed her head into the kitchen counter. Her skull cracked, and realizing they may have fatally injured her, panic set in. Angelica, unwilling to deal with another corpse, decided they needed to get rid of her quickly. They bundled Suzanne into the car, intending to drive her back to her apartment. It was the night of April 21st, 2016. Wilfred and Angelica were speeding towards Suzanne's apartment, who was lay in the back seat. She was unresponsive. Her body was cold and covered in signs of severe abuse. She was sprawled on top of black bin bags. She was filthy and reeking of urine, desperately in need of urgent medical attention. Suddenly, the car made some unusual noises and ground to a halt. Stranded on the street, an absolute nightmare began to unfold. Despite it being a warm night, Suzanne shivered uncontrollably. She was wrapped in blankets in a futile attempt to stave off the cold. In a state of panic, Angelica dashed to the nearest house and banged on the door, pleading for someone to call a taxi. But when the taxi arrived, Suzanne's condition took a drastic turn for the worse as she started to convulse. Panic escalated into sheer terror as the couple then screamed for an ambulance instead. At the hospital, the medical team noticed all the cuts and bruises on Suzanne's body, with clear binding marks on her ankles and wrists, indicating prolonged restraint. She was also suffering from severe blood poisoning. Despite the hospital staff's frantic efforts to save her, Suzanne succumbed to her extensive injuries within an hour of arrival. Her condition was so dire that hospital staff immediately alerted the authorities. The investigation moved quickly. Just 6 days later, when authorities arrived at the house, they uncovered a trove of evidence, including contracts from multiple victims and even partial remains of Anika. Both Wilfred and Angelica were arrested and taken into custody. Initially, Angelica denied any involvement in the crimes. However, upon learning that Wilfred was placing the blame on her, claiming that she and Suzanne were a couple and that he had no part in Suzanne's death, Angelica revealed the names of 7 women who had been tortured and some murdered by the pair. She refused to go down alone. The actual number of victims is believed to be much higher. In court, Wilfred and Angelica couldn't even look at each other. They were both charged with murder by omission, which is similar to manslaughter in the UK. Shockingly, it couldn't be proven that either Anika or Suzanne had been murdered in cold blood. The main issue in court was determining the dynamic of the two. Angelica portrayed herself as a terrified victim, coerced in committing the atrocities on the women. Wilfred's defense focused on his mental capacity, with an IQ reported to be 59, questioning whether he truly understood right from wrong. A forensic psychiatrist said that Wilfred demonstrated characteristics common to repeat offenders, including a sadistic personality and pronounced psychopathic traits. His profile indicated a significant risk of future offences. Angelica showed traits of autism combined with psychopathy. She manipulated others through intimate relationships and exhibited a total absence of empathy. Described as exceptionally intelligent, Angelica was also known for her dominating nature and insatiable desire for control. The trial included testimony from 48 witnesses and 7 experts, but it was Crystal P's testimony that had the most significant impact. She had endured the cruelty and survived to tell her story. Crystal, still feeling shame and humiliation, asked her husband to wait outside whilst she testified. She later stated, and quote, "It was both of them in equal measure." On October 5th, 2018, Wilfred and Angelica were sentenced. Angelica received 13 years for her part in the murders, whilst Wilfred was sentenced to just 11 years, also to be served in a psychiatric hospital. In 2020, Wilfred was transferred to a regular prison after authorities deemed him fit to serve in a standard facility. He now faces the possibility of parole. But in 2022, there were calls for him to be placed into preventative detention, potentially extending his imprisonment indefinitely. Angelica is eligible for parole in 2025. I found this case to be truly shocking, and the fact that they could both be walking the streets in the near future is terrifying. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane.